Hello Red Case listeners, welcome back to the channel that dives into the darkest corners of human deception, the most chilling crimes, and the stories that remind us not all that glitters is gold. Today, we bring you a story that does not involve blood, a weapon, or a missing person, but instead, a bottle of wine worth thousands, poured with a lie. This is the story of Rudi Kurniawan, the man known as the wine fraud king, the vintner of deceit, or as some called him, the wine mafia. His crime, simple but brilliant: he sold fake wine to billionaires and made millions doing it. But how did a young man from Indonesia, barely in his 20s, manipulate the world's elite with nothing more than charisma, counterfeit labels, and a wine cellar full of lies? Tonight, we uncork the mystery of the man who conned the connoisseurs. This is Rudi Kurniawan, and the most expensive scam served in a glass. It began like a fairy tale. In the early 2000s, New York's wine auction scene was booming. Collectors were paying hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, for rare vintage bottles. Wine wasn't just a drink, it was art. An investment. A statement. And then came Rudi, a young, charming man with a mysterious accent, a bottomless wallet, and, as it seemed, the rarest collection of wine in the world. But who was he, really? Rudi claimed he came from an extremely wealthy Indonesian Chinese family. He said his family made their fortune in bottled water and oil. He dressed in fine suits, drove luxury cars, and was always seen with a smile and a glass of Burgundy in hand. People described him as warm, generous, and elusive. But there was a problem. No one really knew him, and he wanted to keep it that way. By 2002, Rudi exploded onto the US wine scene. He started appearing at high-end auctions hosted by Aca Merrill Condit, one of the top auction houses in the country. He bid with reckless abandon, $50,000 for a case of 1982 Chateau Lafleur, no problem. $200,000 for a rare Domaine de la Romani Conti, he'd take two. But soon, something strange happened. He wasn't just buying wine. He started selling it. And not just small sales. In 2006 alone, Rudi sold over $35 million worth of rare wine at auction. His bottles were immaculate, perfect labels, flawless corks, dusted just right, like they had sat in a private French cellar for decades. Buyers rushed in, thrilled to finally get their hands on vintages they thought were long gone. But here's the twist: some of those vintages never existed. One man who began to suspect something was off was Laurent Ponsot, a fourth-generation winemaker from Burgundy, France. In 2008, he got a tip. Bottles of Clos Saint Denis 1945 were being sold at an Aca auction, labeled as made by his family's vineyard. The problem: his vineyard didn't start making Clos Saint Denis until 1982. It was impossible. He flew to New York, walked into the auction house, and demanded answers. But the bottles were already gone. He asked, who sold them? The name: Rudi Kurniawan. Behind the scenes, Rudi's empire wasn't what it seemed. He was renting a modest house in Arcadia, California. He lived with his mother and a small staff. He threw extravagant dinners, serving up $1,000 wines like water. People said his generosity was intoxicating, but in reality, he was deeply in debt. He owed over $10 million to banks and wine dealers. To stay afloat, he began making his own wine, mixing cheaper bottles together, relabeling them with forged vintage labels, and sealing them to perfection. He had turned his kitchen into a counterfeit wine lab. In March 2012, everything came crashing down. At dawn, federal agents knocked on Rudi's door. Inside, they found a full-scale forgery operation, thousands of fake wine labels, corking machines, dusting tools, old empty bottles soaked clean, and hundreds of bottles mid-prep being turned from cheap wines into million-dollar fakes. The FBI described it as an assembly line of fraud. He was arrested on the spot. The charge: mail and wire fraud, tied to over $30 million in counterfeit wine sales. In 2013, Rudi's trial began in New York. The courtroom was packed with journalists, wine experts, and former victims. including billionaire Bill Koch, who had unknowingly bought hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Rudi's fake bottles. Evidence showed that Rudi had sold at least 12,000 bottles of counterfeit wine. He had made over $40 million from the fraud, and not a single legitimate family estate confirmed producing the wines he claimed to have. When asked to speak, Rudi said nothing, no apology, no defense, just silence. Rudi Kurniawan was found guilty on all counts in 2014. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, the first person in U.S. history to be convicted of wine fraud. He was also ordered to pay $28.4 million in restitution and forfeit another $20 million in assets. When his prison term ended in 2021, he was immediately deported to Indonesia, where his current whereabouts remain unknown. Some believe he's quietly living under another name. Others say he's plotting a return in another industry, another lie, because once you taste power, it's hard to give it up. You might think this is a victimless crime, just some rich wine collectors losing money, right? But that's the wrong way to look at it. For collectors, fine wine is a legacy, a connection to culture, history, and even identity. Some people spend decades tracking down specific vintages, and for many, it wasn't just about drinking, it was about trust. One collector said he bought a 1947 Chateau Lafleur from Rudi for $50,000. He saved it for a special occasion. When the day came, he opened the bottle. It tasted like nothing. Flat. Sour. He didn't even finish the glass. He later found out the real 1947 Chateau Lafleur has never been sold publicly. He had bought a fantasy. That's what Rudi sold, not wine, stories, dreams. And when those dreams shattered, so did the pride of the people who thought they knew better. Rudi's arrest sent shockwaves through the global wine industry. Auction houses, once the gatekeepers of authenticity, were now under scrutiny. How could they allow one man to sell millions of dollars in fake wine without checking the truth? They were making money too. Auction houses take a cut, sometimes 20% or more, of each sale. So when Rudi's bottles drove up prices, they didn't ask questions. They simply opened the bidding. The scandal forced companies to implement stricter verification protocols. New technologies emerged, like microscopic label analysis, ultraviolet ink checks, and even DNA testing of corks. The wine world could no longer afford to rely on taste alone, because taste can lie. Even after all this, the arrest, the trial, the prison sentence, one question still lingered. Who was Rudi Kurniawan? His real name, Wang Huang. He was born in Jakarta, Indonesia, in 1976, to a Chinese-Indonesian family. At some point, he entered the US on a student visa, but it expired. He stayed anyway, living undocumented for over a decade. He wasn't wealthy. There was no bottled water empire, no oil fortune. His past was built on illusions, just like his wine. And yet, somehow, he charmed everyone. Why do people like Rudi do what they do? Psychologists say that con artists aren't just liars. They're performers. They thrive on admiration. They study their victims. They manipulate not just facts, but emotions. Rudi had mastered the language of wine. He studied flavor notes, vineyard histories, soil conditions, and bottle shapes. He could tell you, with conviction, that a 1929 Burgundy tasted like velvet and ash, and people believed him. He understood one thing better than anyone. People want to believe, especially the rich, especially when the lie is wrapped in prestige. Rudi served nearly 9 years of his 10-year sentence. In early 2021, he was released from federal prison, but his freedom was short-lived. ICE immediately detained him, and within weeks, he was deported back to Indonesia, and that's where the trail goes cold. No one knows where he is now. No photos. No interviews. No statements. Some say he's hiding in Jakarta, living a quiet life under a new identity. Others believe he's moved on to a new scam in a different industry. Wine? No. That door is closed, but con men rarely stop, they just evolve. In the end, Rudi's empire was built on just 3 things: charm, counterfeit labels, and a deep understanding of human vanity. He didn't need violence, he didn't need threats, he simply told people what they wanted to hear, and they paid him for it. $50 million gone, thousands of bottles lost, reputations destroyed, collectors humiliated, all because of one man with a kitchen full of glue, corks, and lies. So here's the question we leave you with: was Rudi Kurniawan a criminal, or was he simply a mirror, a reflection of how much we crave status, of how badly we want to belong in elite circles, of how little we question when something feels exclusive? In a way, Rudi didn't invent the illusion, he just exposed it. He reminded us that fraud doesn't always wear a mask, sometimes it wears a tuxedo. And hands you a glass of 1947 Burgundy. So, the next time someone offers you something rare, something priceless, something too perfect to be true, take a moment and ask, what's really in this bottle? Thank you for watching Red Case. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves mystery, deception, and true crime. Tell us in the comments, what do you think happened to Rudi Kurniawan? We'll see you in the next case. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop asking questions.